So this year has really been sort of dominated by squirrel news, and just to give you a little idea, I'm going to cover this over Christmas. But in the US, the sort of political discourse was epitomised by the fact that the state overreached and murdered a New York state man's pet squirrel. In the UK, the political situation had been epitomised by the fact that the invasive grey squirrel was being pushed back by the native red squirrel as a sort of omen of things to come for British politics. And so both sides of the Atlantic have had sort of symbolic squirrel news that has been a good avatar for the political discourse. And I'm not quite sure what this omen is. I'm going to read from this article here. Scientists discover East Bay squirrel preying on other mammals for the first time. Now, I like to think of squirrels as cute, cuddly animals that collect, little tiny nuts for the winter. I don't think of them as sort of like the rabbit from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where it is lethal, it goes for the throat, and it is carnivorous. So let's have a little read of this, shall we? Researchers have found a population of California ground squirrels in the East Bay Park that are actively hunting and eating voles. A behaviour that has shocked squirrel experts. I mean, I wish, if things had been different, I would like to be a squirrel expert. What a job. We all think of squirrels as pretty and cute and harmless, the most acceptable of rodents, really. Their bouncy tails and adorable way of eating acorns have endeared them to many humans who haven't had to remove a squirrel nest from their attic. I've actually had that before, and it's amazing how much noise a squirrel makes. You think it's a little tiny squirrel. It sounded like there's actually a person up there. Bit worrying. But squirrels don't just eat acorns. Scientists have long considered squirrels omnivorous, and there are actually lots of animals that are omnivorous, taken aside from the article where you wouldn't think they were. Like horses and deer, for example, are opportunistically carnivorous. There are lots of videos online of both deer and horses eating baby birds, for example. And of course, the reason being, even though they're not necessarily set up to digest it as well as actual carnivore, is that there are nutrients in there that are more difficult to get from their regular diet, although, of course, they're still adapted to eat plants mainly. And it carries on to say, but their typical diet outside of nuts and seeds are usually opportunistic. They'll steal an egg out of a nest, eat a small bird, feast on the carcass of a rodent, or chow on an insect if one presents itself. UC Davis researchers have now found California ground squirrels doing something they weren't thought capable of, which is actively hunting and preying on smaller mammals, namely voles. Of course, voles are sort of similar to mice in size, aren't they? So they're smaller than a squirrel, but it's big enough that it would be difficult to imagine a squirrel taking it down. I suppose it makes sense that they've got the sharp teeth to get into nuts, and so they could probably have the bite strength to take down a vole. And it says, in a study published in the Journal of Ethology, researchers say that they observed squirrels hunting and eating voles in Briones Regional Park. Out of the 74 interactions they recorded between squirrels and voles, 42% involved predation, which is actually quite high. So it's not just that they observed one desperate squirrel, it's that actually about almost half of all interactions are them preying on each other. So maybe when they have enough food, most of, just over a majority of the time, they won't do it. It says, once we started looking, we saw it everywhere. The UC Davis researcher, Sonja Wild, that's a bit of determinism there in that second name, in an announcement about the study. We saw that behaviour almost every day. Wild posted a video of some of this behaviour, and if you're not the National Geographic watching type and get upset with animal on animal violence, don't press play. I know it's on YouTube, but I'm not going to play it because there is the title if you want to see it. But I don't want to be discourteous to the person who made the video and play it here. But you know where it is. The squirrels were also observed in at least 8 instances competing with other squirrels over vole prey or trying to steal a vole carcass from another squirrel. Researchers believe that this predatory behavior, which they called shocking to observe, has coincided with a sudden abundance of voles in this part of Contra Costa County. So this sort of ties in quite nicely to the picture of animal life we're starting to get, that there are actually behaviors that manifest when certain rare conditions occur. And one of the ones I've discussed recently is where orcas or killer whales wear salmon on their heads like a hat. And this has been much speculated about because it first occurred in the mid 80s and then started happening again recently. And it's hypothesized, I think the most compelling argument is that when there's an abundance of food, it's a way of just keeping something on hand for when you're hungry later, because they already have a behavior where they keep like food under their fin, which I didn't even know happened in the first place, to save for later. But a salmon might be a bit too small to keep under their fin, and so they keep it on their head because they're very intelligent animals, and there could be an element of also play involved in it as well. But it seems to be in one specific pod, and as we're seeing here, this could be a behavior learnt by specific squirrels in a specific area. And in fact, another example of this is in some parks in London, the seagulls have started hunting pigeons by dragging them into the water of the pond, a man-made pond in the park, and drowning them and then eating them that way, because otherwise it might be a bit more difficult for them to kill the pigeon. And so there are these isolated pockets of animal sort of adaptations, new innovative behavior, and we quite often like to look at animals as being very static, and it seems like that's not actually the case. And I'm directly quoting here from the article: the fact that California ground squirrels are behaviorally flexible and can respond to changes in food availability might help them persist in environments rapidly changing due to the presence of humans, Wild said in an announcement. Squirrels are one of the most familiar animals to people, says Jennifer E. Smith, lead author of the study and associate professor of biology at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. We see them right outside our windows, we interact with them regularly, yet he has never before encountered in science behavior that sheds a light on the fact that there's so much more to learn about the natural history of the world around us. Interestingly, squirrels were not seen preying on any other mammals besides voles. So yes, that is very interesting, and maybe think twice before feeding some squirrels in the park. Maybe trade your nuts for voles if you have them to hand. But this is interesting, and I chose to cover this because it's correcting a misconception about the natural world, that it's this very static, stable thing that needs to, humans need to do things to just stabilize this point of equilibrium. And that's not true. Things are always in flux. The animal life is changing. Animal populations change as they compete with one another, and things slowly become dominant or not dominant. It's at the end of the day, lots of things struggling to survive, and there's not necessarily this natural balance, this perfectly sustainable goal to reach, because they're animals. They're not thinking in those terms, and sometimes these things are thrown out of balance. And when there is an abundance of voles, it seems like squirrels become carnivorous. I never thought I'd be saying that.